Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of October 21st of 2025, Farmington Board of Education. So stand, join me for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Kathy, and there you go.
All right, so I'm really proud and pleased to introduce Tom Mooney, who has been our attorney for several decades here in Farmington, and he literally writes the book for Connecticut school law, and he's here to provide some professional development related to the roles and responsibilities of elected officials on the Board of Education.
East and last call for the capital city bus. Last call.
And also, we're going to talk about our bylaws as well. Our attorney, Tom Mooney, has done a review, has some suggestions for us. So welcome, Tom. We're really happy that you're here today.
Well, thank you. I think everyone has received an outline of my comments, and I have extra copies here if anyone needs it. And I just also want to say that I would welcome your questions and your comments. This is going to go a lot better if you don't have to listen to me for the full time. So I welcome your questions as we're going along. But what I'd like to talk about, throughout the country, there's been questions and concerns as districts have dealt with speech by students, speech by employees, and speech by public officials. And the rules are different for each, and the advent of social media has made this more challenging situation for all three groups. And so I thought I would just start by differentiating between the three groups. And I'll just start with a question that I ask my students. I teach at UConn. Who has greater free speech rights? Employees who are adults or students who are not yet adults? Who has greater free speech rights?
Students?
No?
Students?
Students, even though school officials act in loco parentis. What free speech rights do your kids have at the dinner table?
Well, there's no constitution at my dinner table.
And that's the huge difference. Back in 1969, which is the first case I'm going to talk about, the Supreme Court changed the rules entirely. Up until then, the relationship between educators and students was governed by that Latin phrase, in loco parentis, in place of the parents. And so educators could tell kids to be quiet, sit down, listen, eat your peas, do your homework, whatever. And but in 1969, the United States Supreme Court said something remarkable, which now seems natural. But at the time, the court said, it can hardly be argued that students or teachers shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse
Tom,
gate.
can I interrupt you a second? There's some folks in the audience. Are you having a hard time hearing Mr. Mooney? Okay, I couldn't tell. You just like you were straight, that's all.
Okay?
It could maybe turn around a little bit, or I don't know, just so the audience can hear you a little bit better, that's all. Sorry.
I don't want to turn my back on anyone. So if this works for you, it works for you, then I'll proceed.
Thank you.
So just to rewind to the Supreme Court, they said in 1969, it can hardly be argued that students or teachers shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. And indeed, it could be argued. And one of the justices was Justice Black, dissented and said, this is crazy. We're turning over our educational system to the students who may have the loudest mouths, but not necessarily would be the brightest students. So there was dissension, and in fact, there is a justice of the United States Supreme Court sitting today who continues to believe that the decision in that case was incorrect. And that case involved a student, Mary Beth Tinker, who was about my age. We graduated from high school at the same time. And Mary Beth Tinker, her brother, and her friend came to school wearing black armbands. And she was suspended in loco parentis because she violated the rule that they had adopted ad hoc to prohibit the anticipated protest against the war in Vietnam. And so she was suspended, and as I say to my school district clients, the exciting thing is that decisions you make in the ordinary course of business can land you in front of the United States Supreme Court. And that's what happened in that case. She lost in the district court, she lost in the Court of Appeals, but she won in the Supreme Court because the court viewed that the free speech rights of students was a constitutional protection. But contrary to the normal rule regarding the free speech, regarding the First Amendment, the court said that school officials can restrict speech if they reasonably forecast material disruption, substantial interference with the educational process, or invasion of the rights of others. In the normal First Amendment realm, the officials have a duty to protect unpopular speech. And if someone wants to come to have an organized rally and it's unpopular, you can't say you can't do that because we anticipate disruption. You have to protect that person's right, because in fact the First Amendment exists to protect unpopular speech. You don't really need a First Amendment if everyone likes what you have to say. So the court said in Tinker that students have a right of free speech, but it can be restricted, but only if school officials reasonably forecast material disruption, substantial interference, or invasion of the rights of others. And so the Tinker decision changed the rules. Suddenly school officials are not only in loco parentis, but they're viewed as agents of the government and subject to the protections. Students are subject to the protections of the Bill of Rights. So since that decision in 1969, the court has revisited the free speech rights of students 4 different times. And the first time was in 1986, when the court considered a claim made by a student who had made a vulgar speech to his colleagues when he nominated his friend to be the class president. And he won, given Tinker. The district court said this wasn't materially disruptive. It was a little off color, but it wasn't materially disruptive. He won at the Court of Appeals, but the Supreme Court, again, refined now the rule. And if students engage in vulgar speech in school, school officials have the right to restrict their speech, even if it isn't disruptive. And then 2 years later, 1988, the Supreme Court considered a claim made by editors of the student newspaper in a particular school district. And there they had written an article on children of divorce. And the court and the school administration felt that that would, and teen pregnancy, felt that that would embarrass particular students. And so they said, you can't run that article. They sued. That went to the Supreme Court. The school district lost in the district court, lost in the Court of Appeals, but then when you get to the Supreme Court, the court ruled that when school officials are supervising school-sponsored speech, like the school play or the school newspaper, then they have the right to regulate student speech as long as they have a legitimate educational need. So they don't have to show disruption, they just have to show a legitimate educational need. Then nothing happened for almost 20 years until 2007. And some of you may have actually heard of this case because its popular name is the Bong Hits for Jesus case. And in that case, the Olympic torch was being run by, you know how they run the Olympic torch all the way to the Olympics, run by Juneau High School. And the student didn't go to school that day, but he and his buddies drove up as the torch was being run past Juneau High School, unfurled a banner, and I guess you know what it said, Bong Hits for Jesus. And the principal suspended him for his impertinence. And that went to the Supreme Court. He won at the district court, he won at the Court of Appeals, got to the Supreme Court, and they made a new exception. Like vulgarity, if student speech can be considered to advocate for the illegal use of drugs, you can regulate it without showing disruption. And the last case is germane to our topic today, and we call it the vulgar cheerleader case, because BL, not her real name, but rather her initials, went out for cheer, and she had been on the JV team, and she was deeply disappointed when she went out and she was relegated to stay on the JV team. She didn't make the varsity. So she went across the street and posted on Instagram vulgarities about cheer and vulgarities about the school. And another girl on the team, well, I guess the phrase is ratted her out. And the coach found out about her post on Instagram and kicked her off the team and demanded an apology. And that became a Supreme Court case. And what's most significant about that case is that the court reaffirmed that school officials have the right to regulate student speech off campus. The Third Circuit ruled against the school district and said that when students speak off campus, whether it's on social media or otherwise, it's outside of the jurisdiction of the school. So those of us who follow these things, we're very concerned about things like bullying and threats and how school officials should be able to address concerns about bullying. And in fact, fortunately for us, the court held that the Tinker test does apply, that school officials do retain the right to regulate student speech off campus in, however, limited circumstances. And it's one of those cases where the school district lost, but it also won. The school district was found that they hadn't met the Tinker standard, but because her vulgar speech off campus was not significantly disruptive of the educational process, but so she won, but the court affirmed the principle that school officials could regulate student speech online, on social media, in circumstances where there is harm to students, severe bullying, threats, and so on. So that's where we are today in terms of student free speech. And I think the answer to my question at the start was that students have greater free speech rights. And that is the correct answer. When I started out being a lawyer some years ago, the senior partner in the firm told me to avoid adjectives, if I could, doing my work, avoid adjectives. And that's relevant to the Tinker case because Tinker says school officials can regulate student speech when they reasonably forecast not disruption, but material disruption. Not interference, but substantial interference. So it's a high bar for school officials before you can go ahead and regulate the speech of students, whether it's on campus or off campus. And so by contrast, public employees do not have as robust a protection under the First Amendment. And for public employees, interestingly, the court first announced the new rule that public employees have free speech rights the year before Tinker in 1968 in a case involving a Mr. Pickering, who wrote a letter critical of his Board of Education and the superintendent didn't like that a bit, so superintendent fired him. And that became a Supreme Court case. He said, no, I have free speech rights. The Illinois courts all said, no, you don't. You're a public employee. And that goes all the way back to the 1890s when Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said the petitioner has a constitutional right of free speech, but does not have the constitutional right to be a police officer. And so it was held he didn't have any free speech rights. The court changed that in 1968 with the Pickering case. And the court elaborated on the protections that public employees have under the First Amendment in 1983. And so now the question, except for a big exception, the question is a public employee speaking on a matter of public concern? If they're not, there's no First Amendment protection. If they are speaking on a matter of public concern, then you ask the next question. And the next question is, does the disruption caused by the speech outweigh the benefit or importance of the speech, or vice versa? So for something that's important, you have to tolerate more disruption. If it's not important, you don't. And that's a balancing test that the court announced in 1983. And so now one example of this would be when during the COVID pandemic, there were some districts where teachers were on Facebook when we're all trying to reopen the schools. They're on Facebook saying, they're putting my life at risk, don't come here. And it was highly disruptive of trying to get people back into school after the pandemic. And so that was an example of the balancing test. What is the importance of a teacher's opinion on a pandemic as opposed to an expert, a medical expert? Not so much. What is the impact of a teacher saying, this is dangerous, significant? So many districts struck that balance in saying you really shouldn't be saying that online because you're interfering with our ability to return to normal after the pandemic. The big exception, and so that's the state of the law for speech by public employees in their private capacity. When they speak, however, pursuant to their job duties, the First Amendment doesn't apply. And that was clarified by the Supreme Court in 2006 when an assistant district attorney got transferred against his wishes in alleged retaliation for something he said that messed up a criminal prosecution. And so he claimed that his rights were violated, and on a 5-4 vote, which underscores how important it is who sits on the Supreme Court, on a 5-4 vote, the court held that when people speak what they said pursuant to duty, that is to do their jobs, then it's a personnel matter. It's not a constitutional issue. So that's the contrast between the rights of public employees relative to the First Amendment and the rights of students relative to the First Amendment. And of course, the third category is, what are your rights under the First Amendment as board members? And your rights as board members are that of any other person. And these constructs where we can regulate speech in this context or that context don't apply. And you're citizen volunteers, and in serving your community, you don't give up any of your constitutional rights. And so just the normal rules apply. Obviously, free speech is a central concept for us in our country, but notwithstanding that, there are certain things free speech doesn't protect. Free speech doesn't protect defamation. Free speech doesn't protect fraud. Free speech doesn't protect direct threats. So there are those limits, but those apply to everyone. And school board members and other public officials stand in the same place as any other member of the community. So that's a fairly brief description of the three categories and how the First Amendment applies. I'm prepared to talk a little bit about how those rules may invite a review of your board bylaws. But before I do, I would invite any questions you might have or even comments about how these rules apply to the different categories.
I have a little thing I wrote out for you, Mr. Mooney.
Okay.
I was directed by Chairman Bill Becker and the Vice Chair, who's not here, Andrea Sabinski, to direct the questions to you. So, first question was, who are the 8 members that asked for the special meeting here? Because the entire board is undergoing training because of what Bill Becker chose to post on his Facebook page. This is insulting. Why we are being schooled this way. Why are we? We could have been given this handout, and if any one of us, after we read it, had any questions, we could ask you, the lawyer. I would like to know how much this is costing the taxpayers of Farmington, and I will continue on with, at my first official meeting as a board member on January 8th, 2024, the board chair, Mr. Bill Becker, began his remarks with the following statement. This board can only exceed if we're apolitical. This is not to say we won't have many disagreements, which is healthy, but it won't be political. I won't allow it. I promise I will do my best to respect everyone, students and parents. Those are strong words of leadership and unity. Unfortunately, Mr. Becker's subsequent behavior has not reflected those principles. I've never questioned Bill Becker's First Amendment rights to post anything on his Facebook account. However, I do expect him to follow through with his promises in a public meeting that he would get to the bottom of whomever he claimed put up that post. This is a political stunt right now because Bill Becker put up a reprehensible post on his private Facebook account, and because of the backlash that he received, Mr. Becker chose to use this public forum to explain himself. Mr. Becker has refused for an entire month, despite being asked repeatedly to disclose the results of the investigation he said was going on. Instead, he constructed a charade through this special meeting here on ethics and the First Amendment, and this only distracts from his duty to be accountable to the taxpayers of Farmington for his own political gain. I'd like to have the question answered that I've been asking continually. I don't know how I got here. I spent today working with IT professionals, and we'll get to the bottom of this. We have gotten no answer to the public. He made a private comment in a public setting. And the taxpayers and the board, the rest of the board here deserves an answer.
Well, I'm sorry that you don't share my enthusiasm for school law. I'm here to talk about the First Amendment as is on the agenda. And whatever issues you have, I'm sure that you can address them, but that's not really why I'm here. I'm here because I was asked to talk about the rights that all of you have, board members, students, and public employees. That's what I did. And I'll leave to you whatever rhetorical question you've posed, and I would ask if anyone else has a question. Yes?
I think there's an elephant in the room, and I think Marty kind of alluded to it, and I'm just gonna, give my take on it too. Those of us that called the meeting for a special meeting related to this have been very frustrated because there were direct incidents by 2 individuals on the board. So I want to make that clear too. I mean, each of us have different issues, and that's part of the elephant in the room, that there's been 0 discussion as a board related to this topic. Yet communication has gone out, signed by the board, which I'd like to get to on agenda item B, but I'll get to that in the bylaws when that comes up. And I don't think it's fair to us as board members that we can't have a forum to ask any questions. Like, so for me, like, I respect Marty's opinion and I understand that. My concerns come from Bill is one of the people that posted something and Beth is another person that posted something. I'm not defending or condoning or really having an opinion on what they did. That's for them to do. But at the last meeting, Bill gave a statement and he said he condones, he does not, he's against political violence. He said it was, you know, it wasn't his post, he took it down. Okay, fine, that's Bill's story, that's fine. I've never heard from Beth yet. I mean, I have posts here that we as a board have received.
There's a point of order. She has the right to ask a point of order while you're speaking.
Okay.
I think, much like Tom's answer to Marty, I think this would apply also to your commentary. I just don't see this on the agenda or the point of the meeting. I understand you have complaints, concerns, you're not happy with the way things have been handled. I'm not going to make a statement. I don't need to make a statement. We need to move on, and we need to do the business of the board.
But
This is a distraction from the business of the board.
But
and I
you
don't-
caused the
my
distraction,
point of-
not the 7 other members who
no,
are
I
forced
did
to go
not
through a
cause a
training
distraction.
that has nothing to do
I
with
did not
the 7 of
cause
us.
distraction. My point of order is that this isn't relevant to the agenda of what we're here to meet about tonight.
So in response to that, you've made a point of order. I feel like that is a proper point of order. If you want, so I would rule that your comment, to the extent you're asking Beth to speak on something, I think that's out of order. I think you're able to make whatever statement you want to make, and I would support that right. But, you know, cross-examining, I guess we'll talk about this in the next portion when we talk about board accountability and board membership accountability, right? As part of bylaw discussion. But I think at this point, I would continue with the remarks, but I would defer any, you know,
Okay,
direct questions to Beth.
That's fine. I mean, and this was anticipated. I'm not really shocked by that response, so that's fine. I guess, again, I just want it on the record then. The frustration on my part is that there is no forum for discussion on this topic. Zero forum for other members who had nothing to do with this, who are getting emails, and I will go on the record and say the day after the last meeting, my home was personally defaced by a threat that the Farmington police have been, were called and are actively investigating because of the rhetoric of other board members, who some refuse to explain themselves. Fine, that's fine. I don't understand, as a board member, how do we get a conversation going, or how do we try to have a conversation? This is not the meeting we call for. To be honest with you, Tom, I appreciate you being here. I never even thought this was a First Amendment issue. I have no problem with people posting whatever they want. It's not about that you're going to be arrested for posting it or that you can't post it. It's about accountability and setting the culture and climate of a town that you're an elected official for. So that's where I just have an issue. This is, again, like I was anticipating this, so I'm just going on the record saying it. It's just frustrating that I have young kids. I have to be here early to get schooled on something that I did nothing wrong. I've already sat through training. I have done nothing wrong, and there's just an elephant in the room here. That's what this is. This is just a check the box elephant in the room.
Don't you think we should all be on the same page?
What? James, how can we be on the same page?
The
We
roles
haven't
and
had a-
responsibilities up there are for ethics.
Order,
Ridiculous.
please. James, you were speaking.
I was just saying, don't you think it would be ideal for all of us on the board to be on the same page with regards to this issue? And what we have the ability to do as board members, what we can and can't do, what mechanisms we have as a board to deal with this situation. We should all be on the same page. This is an opportunity for us to do that.
That's not what this is addressing, though. This is nothing to
We
do
are
with
talking
that.
about free speech, and that leads into what we're going to talk about with the bylaws.
If you feel that way, that's fine. It's just my opinion. That's not what this is addressing.
Marty, you
That's
got a
fine.
point?
Your opinion.
In our bylaws, we have a code of ethics, and that's why I wrote the letter, because I believe the code of ethics has been violated by you, Bill, and because Andrew brought it up, as well as Beth. We have a professional responsibility, and you violated it.
I would just
Thank you.
caution the board, that's the agenda,
Right.
and under the Freedom of Information law, you have an obligation to
State
follow
the
your agenda. And you've heard from the board members, and I've not interrupted, but I would say that that's the agenda, and that's why we're here. If people don't like it, then they have the right to complain and ask for a different agenda. But for right now, that's the agenda, and under the Freedom of Information Law, the board should be addressing that agenda and not other concerns.
Is it regarding the agenda?
Yes, it is
Okay.
regarding agenda. Related to the First Amendment, which you just went over, if a board member posts something that in anyone's opinion or in the public's opinion, you voted on them as inappropriate, do you feel like there should be accountability, or does the First Amendment mean lack of accountability or no accountability for what you say, do, or anything?
No.
How does accountability come into play with the First Amendment?
Well, I'm not here to define how you, as a board, should hold people accountable for their actions as board members or as individuals. But no, it would not be correct to say that the First Amendment absolves people of any accountability.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
Yeah, what's
Chris?
Right, yeah.
You talk about, whether something is offensive in the public opinion and the board's opinion, whether something is considered inappropriate, unacceptable. Who determines that? Maybe that's where we get into bylaws and how we're going to examine that, but I think that's a really big question, right? It's a question not just for this board, but in our, sorry, new microphones. I think that's a real important question. Oh, I thought that was me. Who gets to determine those things, right? So I hope that's something that we can
I think that's
discuss.
a comment that's an appropriate segue to the next part of the agenda. But you raise a valid point, which is we all have different opinions as to what we think is appropriate and what we think is not appropriate. If we were going to sketch that out, I think that there are certain things that everyone would agree is not appropriate, and there are certain things that everyone would agree is appropriate. The gray area is the challenge, and that's where I think you as a board have to decide where you want to, quote, hold people accountable, and that would be something I'll talk about when we get to item B. Are there any other comments about the
Yeah, Tom, something I would like for you to cover
oversight?
as well is what is the distinction between a member who is acting in their capacity as a board member and that of a private citizen?
Yes. I think it's a clear distinction, and that is that when you when you refer to yourself as a board member, when you act on behalf of the school district, when you're at a meeting as a board member, or you're at a meeting because you're a board member, then it's inferred that you're acting in your capacity as a board member. The good news for all of you is that that's a fairly small part of your life, and all of you retain your rights as individuals to make decisions as to what you want to say and how you want to act. And unless you fall within that category of described as official board conduct, then the board member would be acting as an individual.
Thank you.
You can move on, Tom.
I'm sorry?
You can move on to the next part.
Happy to. And this relates to some of the comments that I heard, and that is that if there ever a board member engages in conduct that the board finds, or the board as a whole finds problematic, along a continuum, I think it's very important that there be great deference given to individuals. You don't give up your rights as a board member when you choose to serve your community, to be a member of the Board of Education. But there are certain things that can implicate the interest of the board as a whole. I've been involved with board members getting arrested for pretty bad things, and that implicates the interest of the board, and the board has to deal with it. But in Connecticut, there's no mechanism for removing a person from a Board of Education. The premise is that you all serve here as elected by your community. The voters put you here, So this board cannot override the will of the public voters by taking action to remove a person from elected office. You do, however, elect your officers. And as you know, we have a model policy project, and some boards have adopted procedures that would address a concern if a board member is serving as an officer. Because the board members elected that person, then the board members are free to remove that person from the responsibilities to which the board itself elected that member. And so in the materials that I shared in advance of the meeting, one potential issue here is for the board to consider a policy that would operationalize its right to remove board officers under certain circumstances. And as a lawyer, I just want to concede that presenting policies to boards of education, it makes me a little uneasy, because my role as the lawyer is to tell you what's legal and what's not legal. When you adopt policies, you make policy judgments. And that really is your job, not mine. But we work with many boards of education, and to facilitate your process of adopting policies, we have these model policies. And so this is a model policy that we adopted. We present it to you, but whether you wish to go down this road, whether you wish to consider and or adopt this draft policy, is a judgment for you, and I'm not here to recommend one way or the other that you do that, because that's a decision for the board itself to make.
A couple questions, Tom. First, do other Board of Educations have this particular policy in place?
Yes. Yes, in fact, just a brief comment on that. This very issue was the subject of a decision by the Connecticut Supreme Court when the Winchester Board of Education decided they didn't like their chairman, and they had a meeting and removed him, and that became litigated and went to the Connecticut Supreme Court. And the court said, you don't have to have this policy. If you have a policy, you have to follow it. And in that particular case, they reinstated the chair because the board had a policy such as this and didn't follow it, and their action was therefore ruled to violate the due process rights of the individual. So yes, there are many districts that have, many school boards have this type of policy, and those that do are obligated to follow the policy if they ever wish to remove an officer.
What about, excuse me, what about in the Farmington community? Any other boards or commissions that currently have something like this in place?
I don't know.
Mechanisms?
I don't know. I mean, that'd be easy to find out. You just go online and look at their bylaws, but I just happen not to know that.
And just to confirm that this applies to removing a chair or a vice chair from their role as an officer and not removing them from the board. Is that correct?
Yeah, the only action would be to remove a person from the office that they hold as a board member. They would remain members of the Board of Education at any event. And the officers include chair, vice chair, secretary. Some boards have treasurers. Some boards even have parliamentarians. But the only right the board would have relative to removing a person from an elected office as an officer of the board would be to take them out of that responsibility, but the board member would continue to serve on the board.
What are, and this kind of gets back to my question a little bit earlier, what are examples of cause? Again, what is the, like a distinction between a member acting as an officer or a board member and that of a private citizen? Well,
I think cause could arise in either circumstance. I think that there's, and again, I want to be cautious. These are policy judgments, but I'll do my best to answer. when a board member is acting in his or her official capacity, I think the board has a much more direct interest in addressing concerns over that the way the board member is fulfilling his or her public responsibilities. But there are situations in which, like the board member who got arrested, where the board would have a concern that was unrelated to the execution of the board member's public responsibilities. And to circle back to your question, what's cause? This policy takes a stab at defining cause, as you see here. Cause, which means a reasonable ground for removal. And because lawyers wrote it, we say includes, but is not limited to, and then we give illustrations. So I would say that this policy, again, you'll consider whether you want to adopt it, but this policy doesn't purport to define exclusively what cause is, but rather defines more expansively cause as a reasonable ground for removal, which makes sense to me. I mean, you know, the person serves the board, and so if the board as a whole, and this policy requires a majority vote of all members, so it, you know, that's another important aspect to this. But these paragraphs 1 through 4 are illustrations and not exclusive definitions.
I think so.
Tom, I just had a quick question.
Yes.
Are there any models that are for all board members that would impact, not removal, but just not being part of the board or inappropriate?
Are there any
postings?
policies?
Is there any model policy or anywhere else in other districts that have anything like that?
I'm not aware of any model policy that would purport to regulate the actions of board members outside of their board responsibilities. But boards do have the right to disavow particular actions or to specifically, and under Robert's rules, the term is censure under Robert's rules, and they have elaborate procedures for that. So it's more the exception than the rule. There's no rule saying this is how you should act as board members as a policy. I mean, people from CABE will come in and give you training on how they think you should act as board members, but I would see specific guidance would be in the negative circumstances where a concern arises that would cause a majority of the board to want to make a statement relative to that. And I do know that you have your policy supplements Robert's rules. If these circumstances come up, instead of following Robert's rules, you have a board policy that sets forth those procedures.
Thank you.
And yes?
Beth had it first, sorry.
Tom, just around, in districts where you've worked and with boards of education who have adopted this, gone through the process of maybe, so you've worked with boards of education that have gone through this process, maybe considering implementing a policy like this, deciding not to, but you said that many do. What would you see as the pros or cons of bringing on a policy like this? Are there different versions or changes, and kind of what are we looking at
I think
as we
this
consider
model
this?
policy serves as a starting point for your further deliberation on first whether you want such a policy, and second what you want it to say. But despite your invitation, I'm going to decline to suggest whether you should or should not adopt this policy, because I think that's a decision for the board.
Sure. No, I wasn't expecting that. I just didn't know if you had situations or experience where you could say there were some pros to go ahead with this versus cons. Like, what are we weighing?
No. I don't view this as a particularly controversial issue. You just have to decide whether you want a policy like this, because it's one more way in which a board can address a concern about the conduct of an individual board member who happens also to be an officer of the board.
Any questions over here?
Oh, I have a question though.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
So the agenda item is just bylaws, so as I alluded to earlier, I've been concerned about like the communication just surrounding all of this whole topic and why we're here and everything that happened. And one point of contention for me is that a letter went out to the entire student body, parents and everyone, signed on behalf of the Board of Ed, when we had had no discussion, no one approached me, no one approached the other 7 members. So I looked into bylaw 9015, which is transaction of business for Farmington. And I'm just gonna read it just so that we can get on the same page in terms of our discussion. But one says, the Farmington Board of Education, the board shall transact all business at a legal meeting of the board. 2, the board shall act as a whole entity except that a committee created in accordance with these bylaws may act on matters before it in conformity with the committee's purpose or charge. 3, individual members shall make no commitments for the board or issue orders for the board except when executing an assignment delegated by the board. And 4, the board shall concern itself with questions of educational policy and not with administrative details concerning the Farmington Public Schools operation. In the past, I've been fine with communication that's gone out on behalf of the board. In the spirit of working together, I felt like the communication was appropriate and I was fine to have it say on behalf of the board. Given this situation, I have concern now that communication goes out on behalf of the board and my name is tied to that because I did not agree with that communication, nor did I have any discussion. And I would like to understand how the bylaws, number 3, individual members shall make no commitment for the board or issue orders for the board, how that relates to communication that goes out, specifically because we had no legal meeting of the board concerning this issue before the communication went out. So I'd just like to understand that better. And moving forward, I'd like to understand if like it could sign the individual members who maybe agree to the statement, because I don't want to be lumped into the board when I've had no discussion or communication on a topic moving forward, because now I don't trust it.
Well, you've raised an issue concerning a communication that I haven't seen, so I can't speak to the specifics. I would say that I would presume that when you go to the bylaws and I look at the officers of the board, it is typical that the chair speaks on behalf of the board.
I didn't see, I'm happy to have a follow-up on this. Like, I've done some research on this since this all happened. I think the bylaw that is appropriate to this conversation is 9015, which does not say that. We actually don't have a bylaw. Other Connecticut Board of Eds do. Like, I found one in Bethany that they say is the public spokesperson for the board, and there's an actual bylaw that says that. I don't believe Farmington has that. I mean, you can check me on that. That might be true. Maybe I missed it. That's possible. But I guess regardless of the communication that went out, you know, me as a board member, my name was signed to it indirectly as the board, and I did not approve of what the content was. So how can I advocate for myself moving forward?
Well, I think you're doing fine. There's no, you know, I'm not here to tell you how to do your business as a board member. I would say that if the current bylaws do not say that the board chair serves as the spokesperson for the board, that's another thing for the board to consider, because it is standard, and you as a board make decisions only at meetings, and that's understood. And there are circumstances where the board needs a voice in between meetings, and it is common practice and perhaps your custom, if it's not expressly stated in the bylaws, that the board chair would speak on behalf of the board in between meetings. I do acknowledge that there's an important difference between speaking as the chair and speaking for the board. And speaking for the board would typically relate to circumstances where board action is being described by the board chair. Because the board chair can speak for him or herself, but the board chair should not speak on behalf of the board except as is describing the deliberations and actions by the board itself.
Kathy, you want to add something to that?
No,
Because the question
I
talks about the
would
communication.
only say that in the role of the chair and the vice chair, the role of the chair, it's listed that the board chair is the spokesperson for the board, and in the absence of the board chair, the vice chair is the spokesperson of the board. So that is in our policy.
Okay.
What bylaw number is that?
9121.
As I recall, that was correspondence that was summarizing what we did at the meeting on the 15th, right?
That Andreas, yeah.
Andrea did that, right.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't-
That was something I think, sorry, is this on? Okay, so my understanding is that it was Andrea summarizing what had happened the previous night at the board.
No, I'm talking about the correspondence that went out before the meeting, the last meeting. There was a correspondence that went out, I believe, by Andrea before the last meeting. I'd have to pull it up, but I can try to find
I don't
it.
remember which one that is, but okay.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a fair, you raise a fair point. And I think that's something we could probably talk about in terms of going forward, providing board members an opportunity to, I mean, again, the spokesperson will speak, but you can either ratify, you can, dissent or just, expressly indicate you don't want to be on. I think that's a reasonable suggestion, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
All right. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Tom, my question, we had an exchange at the beginning of the meeting where board members are calling on other board members to do certain things and respond to whatever feelings they have about other board members' behavior. What process, is it in the context of a disciplinary hearing that conversation can occur? Or in other words, my understanding and my reading of Robert's rules is that conversation can't happen in the regular order, that it has to be something a little bit, it could be an agenda item or something like that. Can you help me understand that process? I understand there's some frustration about people not getting answers they feel like they deserve.
Right?
And I just want to understand that a little bit more, like how that works.
Sure. I would differentiate between interactions between board members outside of the board table and actions or comments or requests of board members at the board table. At the board table, you're limited by the Freedom of Information Law to the agenda that's established for the meeting. And in my experience, it wouldn't be common to have on the agenda a particular request by an individual board member that the board chair or the board as a whole take particular action. That could be on the agenda, but that would be a rare circumstance in my experience. I think the more common circumstance, and this is essentially universal, you all have your opinions as to whether you're acting in a way that should be free of criticism and whether other people are not meeting that standard. And any board member is free, this is back to the First Amendment, to take issue with the way another board member is exercising his or her responsibilities as a board member. There could be a concern, this board member never comes to meetings, this board member's late, this board member doesn't read the stuff beforehand. There are any number of concerns that one board member could have about another board member. I would counsel that a certain level of tolerance is going to be better than people getting on people's cases, anytime things don't quite suit them. But anyone's free to say, I don't like the way you did that, or I want you to. Free to say that. And the board member to whom that comment is addressed is free to listen and free to respond however that board member wishes, including not to respond. There is no internal supervisory structure among board members, so one board member cannot impose a demand on another board member, but rather any board member can raise questions or concerns, and typically when one raises a question in a non-confrontational way to get to a particular place, that usually goes over better than making demands. But I would just say that you all are here elected by the voters. You all are equal in your authority. And if one board member wants another board member to do a particular thing, it's up to the board member to whom that request is addressed to decide what he or she wants to do. There is no obligation for one board member to do whatever another board member requests.
But in that conversation that you've just described can absolutely happen, and I agree it can happen. What's the context of that conversation? Is it in the context of, can they just blurt it out, or does it have to be in the context of an agenda item? Well, help me understand that.
Well, outside of a meeting,
This is one thing, I'm talking about inside a meeting.
in a meeting, there should be an agenda item related to that particular issue. The board members and any members of public agencies more generally under the Freedom of Information Law should not be discussing matters among a quorum of a multi-member public agency that aren't on the agenda. And so I just would caution, we're human beings and we make comments, but the problem I would see is that if a board member makes a comment or a request, and the board then engages in a discussion of that request, then that would be where the Freedom of Information Law would be violated, because the commission has been very clear that discussion of matters within the jurisdiction of the board should be on the agenda of a board meeting, and a quorum should never discuss such matters without a formal meeting and the matter being on the agenda. A quorum. Individual board members, less than a quorum, you're free to say whatever you want.
Thank you, Don. Angela,
Just to,
Angela had her hand up first.
just to clarify for everyone, I actually know the answer to this, but just so that everyone in the public know, in order to get an agenda item on an agenda, the agenda is set by the chair. So you would, as a board member, if you would want an agenda item, you'd have to ask the chair, and that would have to be accepted as, it'd have to, even though a board member would want something on the agenda, it's not like any board member can really make an agenda item. It has to be requested and approved, correct?
Partially.
Okay.
And I think any board would want to be clear that no individual board member can drive the agenda for the board. You delegate that responsibility to the chair in consultation with the superintendent. But I believe the Farmington bylaws also include a provision that says that if 3 board members want an agenda item, then it should be added to the agenda. Is that,
That's not it.
oh, you don't have that
Yeah,
bylaw?
they can get a special meeting.
I'm sorry?
They can ask for a special meeting, as I understand it.
Well, but any request for a special meeting would perforce involve an agenda item.
Right.
So that would be,
But as opposed to in a meeting, if someone wants to, there's two.
oh, well, that's a separate question.
Well, I think
Within a
that's
meeting,
right.
within a meeting, the only way you can add something to the agenda is to move. It has to be a regular meeting. There has to be a motion, and it has to be passed by 2/3. It has to be seconded and passed by 2/3 vote. So that's the only way. In process, an item can be added to the agenda. But if it's a special meeting, that is not permissible. All special meetings, including tonight, are by law limited to the agenda that's posted. But am I correct, Bill, in my understanding that if 3 board members want a special meeting, then under the bylaws?
It has to be at least 3 people
Right.
to ask for.
And for what it's worth, that really comes from the statute creating boards of education. You'll be happy to know that the law requires that boards of ed meet at least once every 6 months. By law, you have to meet at least once every 6 months. And then it goes on to say, if the chair does not call a meeting,
Right.
3 members of the board may call the meeting. And that's how you get from there to your bylaw.
That's my understanding as well.
So Bill, just to clarify, 3 members have to request the special meeting, but the agenda of the special meeting is still set by
No.
the chair and Kathy, or is the special meeting request,
Based on the request from the member.
that is what the agenda is?
Right, so like you asked, you made a comment at the beginning of our meeting. We did have 8 requests for a special meeting. The majority of those requests were addressed to the stuff that we're talking about today. I know your request was not aligned to that, and Marty's wasn't either. But the other ones were effectively of this temper and tone, kind of following up from the meeting of the 15th. So the majority of the special meeting requests were aligned to what we saw tonight.
Okay.
So we're clear that if 3 board members ask for a special meeting, it would be a meeting on the purpose for the special meeting being requested.
Kathy has a comment.
I just wanted to add, because of the comment about the spokesperson of the board, for the last 16 years as superintendent, the chair has always been the spokesperson, has always been the one to communicate on behalf of the board. If that were to change, it would have to change in the bylaws. So that would go to policy to clarify that, because that has been the way it's always been done. And then if the board chair is not able to communicate, they would then designate the vice chair to do that. So that's how it's always been done. And, you know, in the whole time I have been a superintendent, I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just saying it would need a review and potentially some revisions.
Tom, can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
So, yes, I agree, and obviously, like, for the vast majority, I'm fine with it. But I guess I'm a little confused because I feel like there has to be some gatekeeping to that. I mean, let's just say Bill decides he wants to say something completely obscure and terrible, you know, like, and signs all of our names. Obviously, that's not allowed. So when you're saying you're the spokesperson for something, again, I have no problem if it's something that we discussed and it's being told as, okay, the board had a meeting, or, you know, we're starting a superintendent search and the board is doing it. Of course, like, absolutely. But where I feel like this went awry was that there was no communication whatsoever to any of the members. And then it was signed on behalf of us. So to me, like, I understand it was related to the board, but there's gotta be, like, in the example I just gave, if Bill says, everyone's getting $100, you know, and signs all of our names to it, obviously that would never be accepted. So what
It wouldn't be effective
Well,
because the board hadn't made that decision.
right, so how is this any different that there was a letter was written on our behalf, but the board didn't make a decision about it?
Well, you asked about that earlier, and I said I haven't seen the communication, so I really can't speak to the
Okay.
communication in question.
Okay, yes, we can follow up with that.
Tom,
Yes.
I agree with the idea that, and I think I support the notion that 3 people can ask for a special meeting. I agree with Angela's comment that no one person should have complete control over the agenda. Just as a clarifying point, my understanding is we actually don't technically have what's called an agenda. We actually have a standing order under Robert's rules. And as I did my research and stuff like that, as I'm sure we all did coming into tonight's meeting. So the agenda is not set by the board chair in the sense that I sit down with Kathy on a Wednesday and say, this is what we're going to talk about. The agenda exists independent of anything myself, Ellen Sayud is here tonight, Chris Fagan, whatever any of us ever did. That agenda has existed from as long as I know. So it's not like we control the agenda. Sometimes there's special items that we add, right? If there's a motion to add them to agenda, we've had that in the past happen too. That has to be a supermajority, but we've done that historically. So it's not like there's like this gatekeeping function where we're not going to let anybody have an opportunity to try to add something to an agenda. It's never been how we've ever operated. So I want to be clear on that. And I forgot my other point.
Bill will also add that it's actually in the bylaws as well, the order of business.
Right.
9325.
Right, so, because in other words, as I understand it, in a classic agenda sense, we would have to approve the agenda before every meeting, under Robert's rules. That's why we have this standing order. And it's been, like I said, it's been true for 20 years at least. So,
And also, just to, in the consideration of the model policy that we went over a little bit earlier, I, under the impression that this policy was put in front of a different board with different leadership a couple years ago. Kathy, I don't know if you can speak to that, if that is something that came to this board before?
So the policy chair at the time had looked at all the bylaws and just reviewed various shipment model policies. This is not a mandated policy that you're sharing with the board, but there were, if you look, you'll see a lot of the bylaws changed in 2022, and that was a result of that review.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a question on that, and then I have a question slash comment, or I'm not quite sure what it is. So following up on that, when, at that time, with that board who were considering this, reviewing that policy of, that model policy, was it across the board that the group decided, it's not necessarily, how
No.
was that decision made that it would not adopt that?
It was more the policy chair at the time. It was time to look at them. Some of the policies are from 2000.
Yeah.
So it was just time to look at them. In fact, we've just engaged since that time in a very comprehensive review of all policies, where we've been repealing and we've been adding policies and modifying them. Still have some work to do on those, but it was more the policy chair working with the policy committee.
And so that policy chair, working with that policy committee, obviously a decision was then made not to bring it forward. It wasn't, like, with the pros, cons to it. There was a lot of discussions about pros and cons, to Beth's point earlier about what would be some pros and cons. It wasn't brought forward because it's not adopted.
Yeah.
So there was some discussion and decisions that were made at the committee level that maybe, as a bipartisan, may not necessarily be conducive to adopt.
I think it's fair to say that, as different board members come onto a board, and there are new members on a policy committee, and there's a potential suggestion, right, of this possibility, it would be the policy committee having that discussion about the pros and cons. And is this the time to do it? Why would we do it now? That to me is kind of how this board has run for many years. Different members, and at different times, there's a different need for policy changes or new reports to the agenda. We ad hoc committees sometimes because we're continuously improving. So I do think Shipman and Goodwin is continuously improving and suggesting new policies as we go on. So I think it's always appropriate for, as board members change, to revisit things. And so, that would be the case in that suggestion that potentially, if the board were in agreement, at the next board meeting, you could potentially send this to the policy committee for their review. Then the policy committee, would either bring it back to the board or describe to the board why they're not bringing it to the board.
No, I think, and so, sorry, I want to end this particular question with a comment, and then I have another comment about something else.
I just want to say, just keep an eye on the time.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So, and believe me, and I live in the world of policy in my life, in professional life. And so always, right, I always say there's an evolution. The evolution of a policy because of what may be happening, because there may be a specific, and even with that evolution of that policy, those modifications should be based on the need, and there's a specific, there's a need for that, right? There's justification for, and it needs to be weighted. So the pros and cons and all of that. So I agree, and I would be interested in part of, if this were to move forward, and that's a big if, for me, if it were to move forward, I would want to go back and lessons learned. There's always something in lessons learned. There was a lot of work that was done probably by that policy committee in weighing the pros and cons and trying to determine why and why not. And so it would behoove any board member to also review those decisions that were made or those notes and so forth, to learn from the past and to learn from the time and the effort that was done, and whether to determine if those lessons learned apply now in the current time. So that's one. Sorry, I just had to comment on that. But something I've been thinking about, and I don't know this answer, so I want to say that very clearly. I don't know this answer. Back to the board chair and/or the vice chair speaking on behalf of the board. One of the things I've heard a few times mentioned here, and it was sort of, and I could be 100% wrong, so this is where it's a level setting for me, I'm learning, is that a lot of, maybe it's not necessarily in the policy and maybe it's not in the bylaw, but it is probably a common practice that really, this is a partnership and a collaboration, right? And so things that get communicated out to the public, there is probably from leadership, not just from our chair and our vice chair, but just, I don't foresee that a board chair would put something out there without saying, you know what, let me talk to the superintendent who's the leader of our district. I just think that there is still some checks and balances there in place. And I heard a little bit of that here in this conversation that, there's discussions that take place, maybe, at different levels. And believe me, I also understood that certain individuals are put in certain roles as a leader. And there's processes for those roles. And sometimes, like I think I heard you say earlier, there's also a level of trust, right? And so I just, I think it's just, like I said, I don't know if it's a question or a comment. It's just that this is something I've been thinking about a lot. And I just think that I just don't necessarily see that it's a stamp, sealed, and deliver. I am the leader and no one else. I will consider nobody else. I just don't think that is necessarily the practice in which we have been functioning as my time on this board. And I don't think, based on some of the action steps that I've seen of this board, members who have been part of this board for many, many years, who have committed their voluntary hours on this board for many years, because as I said at the last meeting, because we are fierce advocates for our students, I really truly believe that there is what I like to call collaborative leadership. And I think this board has done a great job of executing and implementing that collaborative leadership. That doesn't mean that it's, I am the decider. It means we collaborate together, we discuss, and we put forward something real good. So I just wanted to comment. Thank you.
Tom, one last question with respect to a special meeting request. How do we determine when a special meeting request comes in, whether the request is appropriate? In other words, we get three requests for a special meeting, but it doesn't necessarily align with what we should be having a special meeting. In other words, it doesn't align to a reason to have a meeting. How do you handle that?
Well, I think the 3-member request, as long as they're the same request,
Yeah.
that's critical. Then they have created the cause to have the meeting on that topic.
And then the board would deliberate whether or not they want to go any further at that special meeting.
You'd have to have that on the agenda for discussion and take it from
The board
there.
would consider whatever it is, and then the board
Right.
would make a decision collectively at that point.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. All right. We have 15 minutes before our regular meeting, so I guess if there's anything else, last thing. Tom, thank you very much for sharing your time with us this evening. We appreciate it. And I will adjourn the special meeting.